Great. Balaji, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. Great to see you. Great to hear from you. In the last, just to set the stage for you and for everybody here, we've seen over the last few weeks an enormous amount of um, uh, online conversation about the amazing growth that India is having and the amazing growth in the startup environment in India and the amazing growth for Indian founders and Indian startup builders. Yesterday, we had a lot of discussions in FILBangalore, pretty large community of builders. We had a ton of discussions about the things that people are building in crypto, why crypto matters to this community, to this country, the opportunities that Indians have here to build great products and to kind of leapfrog into the future. Balaji, you've been writing and talking about this for a very long time, but especially recently, you had an awesome thread about India. I want to dig into that. And so, really, the context for the conversation broadly is you as an amazing entrepreneur and investor and builder and really public thinker have been so inspirational to so many people around the world. I wanted to create the space of conversation where you can help answer some of the key questions that builders have and really impart your thoughts and advice right now for what matters to Indian builders and developers today in 2023, especially with the emergence of the latest stages of AI, the difficulties with AI being developed in a few countries, not in mainly big labs in the US and big labs in the UK and other places, but maybe not here, not as much. However, all of this could change. All of this could be leapfrogged away the same way that India developed the cell networks. So wanted to kind of dive into a lot of these topics with you. Maybe I'll just turn it over to you, and just from all of these broad context and what you've been thinking about, what are you most excited about for India in this moment?
Yeah, so can you hear me, Juan?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, great. So the way I think about it in the Network State book, I had this concept of NYT, CCP, BTC, okay, as essentially there being almost like three poles, technological poles in the world. And I think that actually continues to hold up, where essentially there's like the American sphere, there's the Chinese sphere, and then there's the global decentralized open source sphere, right? As the three spheres of tech. And India being number three in some ways, or a rising number three in some ways, for example, number three in unicorns or what have you, um, it can't play for being number one or number two for a variety of reasons. Where I'm extremely bullish on Indians, but only moderately bullish on India itself. However, what it can do is it can play not to win, but to win-win, which means that individual Indians embrace decentralization, open source, and they get a large enough network effect that they actually get good chunks of Americans and good chunks of Chinese, as well as the rest of the world, behind truly open and free platforms. And specifically, for example, on AI, now I think everybody has seen the need to decentralize AI and to have open source AI, not simply open AI. Nothing against OpenAI; it's a great company. They deserve all the credit for what they've done. They should make a lot of money. All of that is good, but obviously the platform risk is real. And a lot of people are thinking about decentralization. And you've seen a bunch of decentralized models, open source models that have dropped after that. And I think you'll get something that maybe it's like iOS, Android. That's a common way to partition a space where you have a controlled, centralized version and then a decentralized free version. One of the things that's interesting, somebody made a comment like several months ago. I think Altman testified and he said, "This is the dumbest AI is ever going to get." But it's becoming dumber in some ways because they're making the responses, maybe this is changeable, but thanks to regulation, they're nerfing more and more and more responses, whether it's regulation, whether it's censorship. For example, the AI is now like on strike, and it's not going to do all the work that you're asking it to do. When you ask it to fill in a whole sheet, I'll say, I'll do the first 5 rows, you can do the rest. Like, why isn't it doing the rest? It's AI, right? Go
Can we
ahead.
dig into that a little bit more? Like we currently have a trajectory in the world where a few countries, and especially the current dominant social perspectives, are going to shape the development of this critical infrastructure for the world, right? And it's going to like color the way in which so much technology gets, in the way in which this entire new set of capabilities for humanity are going to operate. When I look at this, I'm like, oh man, you shouldn't. The world shouldn't let a few groups that are organized and having to respond to the very loud conversations in one country define the future for billions worldwide. And so we need more groups in more places in the world developing these super capable models to make sure that we have a much broader conversation of what the future should be like. Do you share that perspective? Like, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the AI conversation is complicated because there's at least 4 or 5 different interests or angles. The angle for a long time was AI bias, like, which is really not about. It's really more about biasing AI, where any comment that offends X group or Y group, you're, in a very broad sense of offense, you have to filter, censor, make the AI dumb, or make it refuse to answer. The second is, of course, the whole AGI risk, which was not taken seriously pre 2022 by a lot of people, but then it was after that, after GPT 3, after GPT 4 in particular. The third is, I think, less on people's radar, but with nuclear energy, we actually got all the regulation and all the militarization, like limits on nuclear power, but lots of nuclear weapons. Okay. So that's like the worst possible outcome of state intervention, where you don't get lots of the good stuff, which is infinite, free, cheap energy, but you get lots of the bad stuff, which are weapons that could blow up everybody on Earth. Right. Um, and so the worst outcome would be that third, which is uh, heavy AI regulations on compute and AI militarization. And there's a lot that's trending in that direction, where you're going to get, well, it's a national security risk if you don't do this. And I understand why, because it works as a piece of rhetoric and so on and so forth. But what it leads to is this weird state of affairs where regulations that were maybe put down for some existential risk of, oh my god, an AI that'll kill us all or whatever, are used for very quotidian things. And that gets to the fourth thing, where um it's the same regulations that were justified on the basis of a super intelligence killing everybody or whatever, which I'll come back to, are used to protect jobs. Okay. And jobs of politically powerful actors. Now, this is where it becomes interesting for India in a few different ways, because a lot of the jobs that AI disrupts, like lawyer, doctor, uh, bureaucrat, um, like the kinds of repetitive work that is often within the U.S. system. It's often due to a license, like a lawyer has a JD, a doctor has an MD. There's also like medical billing. Okay, that doesn't require a degree per se, but it's like a lot of this kind of stuff where you're taking in claims and you're adjudicating them. Um, it is obviously journalism. It is art. It is in many ways just to find a point on it. It's the base of the Democrats. And so because of that, in places like California and certainly nationally, you're already seeing things like the Hollywood strike for screenwriters, where they're protesting this because their job is now something that a large part of it can be done by AI. And you're seeing now the movie making tools and so on and so forth. So a lot of the hammerlock that this segment of the US has had on high paying jobs is something that can be done with AI and can be done by Indians overseas. And where they don't have that high cost structure, they don't have the $1,000 an hour billing rate, but they can use these tools and they can generate pretty good outputs, and they can also do a lot of the training data, right? So India could do a lot of what I'd call digital blue collar work for the labeling. It already is doing that. A lot of the budgets for AI are business process outsourcing and labeling. It can also do a lot of digital white collar work, which is a lot of the kind of human aided diagnosis, for example, if you have an Indian doctor in the loop with, AI medicine, and the doctor is a second level of defense and a check, and then there's AI medicine over here, and you bring down the billing rate on an hourly basis. So lots of these very expensive clerical, white collar, et cetera, jobs, you could have an inexpensive Indian plus an AI, or a set of AI tools, right? And generate potentially a very good result, right? Um, so that's why I think economically it's very much in India's interest to pursue something similar to the generic drugs industry, where the generic drugs industry was built in India by simply ignoring a lot of biotech patents and other kinds of things, because it's a poor country and it couldn't afford to pay top dollar for these extremely expensive and unreasonable patents. So India built its domestic biotech industry by just ignoring Western IP, and saying, sue me, fight them in the courts, whatever. And it was a big enough country and it had enough weight and it was good enough at arguing in English that it could push back on that. So now you can imagine generic AI, where you could train in India on full Hollywood movies and RIA content and all this kind of stuff, and you could generate full movies and songs, and you could train on books, and you could train on everything, and you wouldn't have limits on compute, you wouldn't have limits on models. It would be something that would be totally unlocked within India, and that would mean that the budget for training in data centers comes over here, and people would go and maybe set up startups there, or at least retain their startups there, or at least have some Indian backend where the training and model evaluation and so on is done. Go ahead, Juan. You're going to say something.
What shifts in policy do you think is important for India and to make there in order to preserve that trajectory? Meaning, uh, the, in that development, you both need a lot of the Indian people working towards those developments and wanting to build them, but you also need some guardrails and defense from policymakers here to help protect that industry. Or maybe put another way, today the global conversation is about a lot of the AI risks of AI a lot of the AI risks from threats of AI to other countries, but there's little conversation of the risks of the economic value and utility of AI being captured by a few countries, and sort of holding the rest of the world not exactly hostage, but subservient to that set of economic policies. And so, from my perspective, right now, exactly in terms that you mentioned, if we can get models and we can build an industry in a bunch of other countries, especially places like India, then the seat of the table in the broader global conversation will be much more leveled in terms of the playing field of the economic future for humanity in the next 20, 40, 60 years. So as you think through this, like what are the optimistic cases here? Like what should happen in India in the next 3 to 5 years so that India has like a really bright future with this set of technologies?
Yeah. So a few things. First is, uh, India specifically should not do. First of all, what should it not do? It shouldn't do an AI compute ban or GPU restriction or anything like what the US is doing on that, right? Those are all dumb games in my view. Second is it should, something like what Japan either was flirting with or it passed is like a safe harbor for AI training, right? You just essentially, it's a new area of law, and you just rule that you can just train on anything for AI. Like if it's a large enough corpus, you can train on it. And maybe there's some rules about credit, or you can give like a few dollars worth, but if you had very aggressive copyright, we would never have search engines. We would never have a lot of things that are obviously value add. And so, you have to take it. You're weighing the public good along with the individual good. By the way, you know how Hollywood was founded?
No.
It's a great book by Neil Gabler called An Empire of Their Own. And the short answer is Edison had all the patents, and Hollywood was founded on the other side of the country, said Edison couldn't sue them.
Wow.
Okay? It's a big part of it. There's other reasons as well, but that was a big part of it.
Yeah.
So maybe the AI industry is founded on the other side of the world where DC can't regulate it.
Yep.
Right? So that's like, India has there's a vein of genetic libertarianism almost in the country. You've heard the term jugad, like, jury rigging and getting around things, and that's like a low tech kind of version. But there's also just the sort of resourcefulness of getting around dumb regulations, where for multiple generations you had the license rod, you had this thicket of all of these stupid rules, and so on and so forth. And India is now just emerging as a capitalist country. So I'd say, A, don't do things like the compute executive order compute ban. Don't do things like the GPU ban or anything like that. Instead, do the opposite. Welcome the training and so on in India. Uh, B, the as I just mentioned, generic AI allow training to happen in India and model evaluation, the whole stack of things, right? C, one of the things India Stack is doing is they're solving the privacy issue and the consent issue with data in a different way than the EU, which just says, yeah, we want to ensure privacy, so we're going to layer it in bureaucracy to deter you from doing any data analysis of any kind. That's actually not right. What you want to do is protect privacy while also allowing for private aggregations of data that benefit the public. And so some of the stuff that like India Stack is doing is trying to do like a data marketplace type thing, where it's the same group that did UPI, and they've published work on this. And what they want is for companies to just be able to implement one set of APIs and then share their data with others who want to train. Right now, I think this is promising because I think fundamentally it's approaching the problem from the constructive direction of how do we make this work in a privacy preserving way rather than just put a thicket of regulations on it. And I'm cautiously optimistic because of the success of UPI, the success of other things that India Stack has shipped, or that iSpirit has shipped more precisely. So those are three things. A, don't ban compute. Don't deter it. B, allow training and have a very liberal view of copyright. C, allow for solving the privacy problem with this, with something like DEPA or what iSpirit has done. D, and this is a pretty important one, embrace decentralized and open source models, okay, and do so at the official level, and do so obviously at the community level. Related to that, E is recognize that a lot of, every generation, every few years, there's some new gigantic, scary thing that captures the attention of the public and results in an accumulation of power for often the American state or the Chinese state. So, like 9/11 was the risk of nuclear terrorism, and that led to the Patriot Act and all this stuff. I'm not saying that's like totally impossible. Of course, you can, come up with that. But right after 9/11, it was much more salient in people's heads. They thought of it as happening the next day. So all these powers were granted to the state, and that's why you have to take off your shoes at the airport, and everybody's irradiated, and with the body scanners and so on at the airport, and so on and so forth. There's 1,000 costs that were imposed on society that are never taken away, that don't necessarily do anything with the problem. With respect to AI risk, this is a long topic because you can go back and forth on a million of the things. But I think the real AI risk is centralization risk, because the entire premise is, okay, we're going to summon a super intelligent AI, and then we're going to control it completely, and we're going to do so in the interest of everybody around the planet, right? That's
Yeah.
not how it works, right?
Yeah.
Like basically.
There's
Go ahead.
a really high risk here of, even in the optimistic good case where we find alignment and we find a successful path through building AGI and making sure that that's a safe transition. But now that if we do that in a centralized way and is controlled by a few parties, then we now have a massive problem to solve, which is how do you level the playing field? This is where I think crypto has a very strong answer, where we could be building. Fundamentally, crypto and blockchains were built to create structures that are verifiable, where you don't have to trust centralized parties to do the honest thing or do the right thing, but you instead enforce it through math, and you enforce it through cryptography and game theory. So to me, this is like the most compelling benefit of things like blockchains and crypto in the AI case, and it could offer like a very strong potential where we can build decentralized and safe structures around the world, or in different countries, where you can have ways of dealing with the risk, but in a verifiable, trustable way, where you don't have to depend on any party going rogue or going bad, and subverting the use of these models. And so from my thought now is, if we could build an AI training environment and then inference environment that uses blockchains for the provenance of what data the algorithms were trained on, what algorithms were used, what the models are actually being asked to do. You can have the best of both worlds, where you can have good governance over what exactly you're doing, but you can do that in a verifiable way that doesn't get captured by a set of centralized parties. Have you thought of this direction as well, or like different kinds of things? What are your thoughts in
Well,
this?
it's funny you say that, because I actually have some slides prepared on this from a. Can I show some slides? Can I show
Yeah,
some
yeah,
slides
totally,
here?
great.
All right, okay, I'll show some quick slides. Here we go. Um, okay, can you see the screen?
Yep.
All right, so AI and crypto. Let me hear if I hit play here. See if this. Okay, can you still see the screen?
Yep.
Yes, big
Perfect.
screen or not? Okay, good. All right. AI and crypto beyond cliches. AI makes everything easy to fake, and crypto makes it hard again. Why do I say beyond cliches? Because there's 1,000 people who don't know what AI is or don't know what crypto is, and it'll mix together and so on. So this is like the non-cliche, hopefully, version of that, right? Do you see the screen? It says it's like black with the white text on it. Yes
Yes. Yeah, we see the
or
AI
no?
and crypto
Okay.
beyond cliches. We're seeing the diagram.
Okay. Do you see it say AI and crypto are often paired in a vague, hand wavy fashion? Do you see the next slide or not? No.
No, we only see AI makes everything
Okay.
easy to
Fine.
fake.
Fine. Fine.
Crypto makes it hard again.
Okay. Fine. I'll scroll through it like this. Okay. Here we go. So so let's see. Fine. So you can see the screen. All right. AI and crypto are often paired in a vague and hand wavy way. Okay. And here are a few specific areas of technological overlap. Okay. So first, you see where it says AI makes it easy to fake, crypto makes it hard again?
Yep.
Okay. So for example, the fake Trump arrest photos, how, people are trying to say, okay, you can spot an AI generated image by looking at the hands, but that actually won't work for very long. What you want is something like a, message signature on Ethereum. You want basically crypto verification with a public-private key pair that's out there. You can use your Farcaster or something like that to authenticate and to show that this was actually your image, right? Okay. Um, and with ENS, it's probably possible to make it such that you just have cryptographically signed content. Farcaster is one of the first sites to do this. Mirror's another one. But basically, if somebody's claiming to be posting on your behalf, you'd go there and you'd see, okay, did they at least compromise the private keys or not? Which could happen, but it's a higher bar than just claiming to be somebody. Okay. Next, AI proselytizes and crypto verifies it. Okay. So basically, for example, can you tell me about the FTX hack giving citations? So it can give a bunch of citations, but ideally they should be to on-chain block explorer records, right? The reason I say the FTX hack is a good chunk of that happened on chain. So we can actually, so some of those links would even today be to on-chain data, right? In the future, there's there's other kinds of things, basically like the app interface.app.
Yep.
It's like a block explorer for other things besides just financial records on chain.
Yep.
It's social records. Okay. So thus those links start pointing, once you realize that on chain records can be not just financial, but social, AI proselytizes, crypto verifies that your backlinks can be on chain, right? Next, AI breaks a public web, but crypto builds Web3 of trust. Okay, so AI is filling up the internet with garbage spam sites, but you can build Web3 of trust, where essentially the set of backlinks of all of the people, okay, that are again in something like Farcaster, shows, okay, the entire data structure. It's much easier to download a blockchain and analyze it than to scrape the entire web, right? Like basically getting the backlink structure and so on. In many ways, it's like a push update rather than a pull. You don't have to go and scrape 1,000 web pages to, take this very dirty data and figure out who's linking to who. With a blockchain, every transaction is actually in the data structure, and you just get an update every 5 minutes or 10 seconds or whatever it is, right? So it's much easier to index, A. And then B is Web3 of trust basically means that all of these ENS identities all, link to each other, and you can start doing PageRank type calculations. And something like interface is actually quite cool because this is kind of already there. I'm not even talking about it theoretically. You have individual accounts, and you can, if you go to interface.app, follow wallet, see their activity in a feed, right? AI bust captchas and crypto rebuilds them because a robot can click I'm not a robot now and actually solve the machine learning problems or the image recognition problems. But signing with Ethereum, you could require the stake to be above a certain level and the age of the account and pull a bunch of signals on this so crypto rebuilds the captchas, right?
Quick question here. What do
I'll
you
do a
think
few
of
more. Go ahead.
what do you think of proof of human type of systems? Right. We both have we have ways of doing
Yeah.
this with biometrics. We have ways of doing this with social networks. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, ENS has a feature called ENS custom records where you can append many fields to an ENS name. And so you could have many different proof of humans on a given ENS name because you assume that any one of them will eventually get gamed. And so some sensor fusion keeps you ahead of the gaming of it. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like
So
almost like multiple stamps in your passport or periodic renewals of your passport, kind of.
yeah, like a key-based oriented structure where you can have many different proofs from many different mechanisms. Are you, by the
Exactly.
way, are you worried about biometrics being used here? Like, there's a huge security-oriented or safety-oriented debate on whether or not the biometrics approach is a good one. My view here is that without biometrics, everything else can be faked by AI systems, and so we just have to lean on biometrics, but we have to do it right. But curious if you agree with that or disagree.
Well, Apple has a massive rollout of biometrics that we take for granted, where it scans your face 10 times a day with Face ID and your fingers with Touch ID, right? So clearly biometrics does work in that sense, right? And we don't think about the fact that Apple scans a billion faces and fingers a day, but it kind of does, right? Um, or whatever the number is, but it's something on that
Yeah, yeah.
order. Um, the thing about that, the good thing about biometrics is it's hard to lose, right? The bad thing is it is possible to fake. Um, and once it's like, stolen somehow, um, you need liveness detection or something like that. Like you have to start making, like this expressions with your face because maybe you could just have a screen that looks exactly like somebody. And, I haven't seen yet, I'm sure somebody has done this, but it's probably, unless the cameras on an iPhone need to start detecting like 3D or depth or something like that, because you could probably have a very convincing 2D image put up to a camera.
Yep.
I haven't yet seen whether somebody can beat Face ID with an AI generation on their side. But that is a problem with biometrics is that for famous people, or even people who are reasonably just well recorded, you could steal some of their, identity. Like, for example, a voice print can be stolen now, right? Because you can just simulate somebody's voice. So I think biometrics are a piece of it, but they shouldn't be the only piece of it. And you have to be very careful about what context you use them in.
Yeah, yeah. Yep,
That's
makes
what I
sense.
think about that. But I'll do a few more slides, then I'll give you back. All right. Okay. AI training is centralized, crypto can decentralize it. The largest crowdfunding projects have all been the yellows are all crypto projects. So crypto is the mechanism for doing crowdfunding online. It destroys all previous mechanisms because it can do capital formation across borders. So if you want to do a big, expensive training run for an AI model, crypto crowdfunding can do it. And then you could imagine something where the model itself is um, updated relatively infrequently, and it's just downloaded as one giant, file. And Justine Tunney just posted something like this, like a exe file. You just download it and run it, making it really simple. And models are going to get more and more portable and simple like this. So you imagine every new version of the model, maybe it's updated every 3 months or 6 months. It's like the next version, and that's actually pretty good for running on Bitcoin's on like version 25 or something now. I forget the exact right. So you have 25 updates in like 13 years. I know there's individual point version updates, but you understand my point. So this is actually something where you could because it's not continuous updating like SaaS, right? It's batch updating right now. Because batch updating, you do a batch training, you distribute the model on, and it runs on 1,000 nodes, and then you maybe pay per token for model evaluation. That's possible right now. If somebody in the audience wants to code something, just a proof of concept, show you don't have to do the training decentralized, but you could do something where it's like, you know, train a small model, have a file that people can download from the web, okay, have them run that server locally on their computers, and just like a Bitcoin RPC node or an Ethereum RPC node, have people be able to pay per token to do model evaluations when it's running on like 10 nodes, right? That is totally possible right now. It'd be a great proof of concept if somebody wants to do it, where it's like at least the decentralized evaluation on a per coin basis or per token basis, right? Um, evaluation centralized crypto can decentralize. This is what I was just talking about. Basically, this is an example of doing a model evaluation on a single Mac Studio, right? Um, and AI creates new authorities and crypto decentralizes them. So monotheistic AGI is essentially the model that's being pursued in the US, where it's like one AI god. It's like an Abrahamic kind of background context. Whereas the Indian context or the global context is polytheistic AGI, where you might have a bunch of superintelligences in every community of sufficient scale, whether it's a country or just a large enough online community, trains its own AGI and takes guidance from it and programs it with its values and so on and so forth. Because right now, the whole concept of AI alignment is really EA alignment. You get why?
Yeah.
Because it's like effective altruists who want it to be aligned to their preferences, but they are obviously a tiny, tiny demographic slice of the world. And I give them credit for being on top of this issue earlier than others, right? And seeing that, so obviously they deserve some credit for that, but it's also not something that can be centralized to just them. Like, and it's similar to some of the non-proliferation debates people have had. Anyway, so those are 8 points. AI makes everything easy to fake. Crypto makes it hard again. So that's the relation between them. I should probably post this talk. All right,
Yeah, no,
coming back.
this is
Go,
great.
go, go.
And I think we agree on a ton of this. The this is where I, this is where crypto and blockchains really have something fundamental to offer to the AI problem space, and could really be a lever where we judo the entire landscape into ending up with a much better future for the world, where if we can get the right layers of verifiability in place now around training, around models, around inference, around how they're used, what different groups around the world have access to them, this could end up with a much better playing field for everyone worldwide. And the current trajectory is not that. The current trajectory is this is highly centralized. This is in a few labs. This is in a few labs in a few countries, and they will dictate what will happen around the world for decades. And while there is a lot to be said for making sure that the transition is a safe one, and we decrease and lower risk, we have to do that in a way that it doesn't create a huge disparate environment where a few countries end up way ahead of everybody else on the planet, or where a few people end up way ahead of everybody else, everybody in the planet. And so this is where crypto and blockchains, in the way that you're describing, could be super important to develop that now. Any thoughts here for like the builders today of like ways of getting started here? Like certainly with each one of the things that you described, there's an application or a thing to build there that could take off. But
Yeah.
any other?
So here's what I do. I would show the full stack of um, getting some, like, for example, take some Project Gutenberg data, okay, which are like old books, or take maybe movies that are outside of the copyright window or something like that, right? Um, you're not going to have a huge data set, but just to do a toy run all the way through and just publish that as a blog post, right? Like we're talking a weekend project, I'm not talking like a production model. But so take the data, uh, train a model, um, post it on a website, get 10 friends to download it, and then do pay per token decentralized evaluation, and just post that whole thing there, right? And then maybe as a proof at the end, say, if you thought this was cool, put in money here at the end, like, send some ETH or something like that, Bitcoin, or probably ETH will make it a little bit easier on this, or Solana, whatever, to this address. And ideally, you make it fully automated where once that balance gets to a certain level, then you kick off another training run or something like that, right? Some sort of loop like that where you can kind of see the thing, then you turn into queues where you add more data. And then once there's enough money for a training run, it kicks off another training run. There's another downloadable. It can be evaluated, right? And that loop over there is like the fundamental loop of data collection, uh, model training, model distribution, and decentralization. That's basically a step that we haven't had so far. And then model evaluation, right? And of course, there's a lot of work. If one thing is the training step there. If you want to get really sophisticated, that's you could do something like federated machine learning. People have been working on this to like distribute the training across phones or what have you. It's very slow right now because that's why you want to do these things within data centers. But um, people like I know Vijay Pandey is folding at home team, and so on. A lot of people are looking at is there some way we can be clever and distribute this among computers and do more of the computations locally, and maybe there's something there. So that would be that full loop would be a great weekend project to do. And again, it doesn't have to be a huge amount of data. You don't want it to be bulky. You want to get the full loop to work first, right? But essentially show that you can do decentralized data or data collection, uh, training, decentralization or distribution of the model evaluation, pay per token evaluation loop, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Um, I want to now turn to a little bit of where the conversation started and where your tweet recently for India started, which was the line investing in India. So as we were talking about some of
oh
these
yeah.
applications, suppose that builders go out and build some of these, they're going to need some capital to grow a team, scale them, and end up in a better outcome. So I want to touch a little bit on your thoughts about the Indian startup ecosystem. From my perspective, um, India has this super advantage here where it's super well connected. You can build startups for a fraction of the cost here than you can in the rest of the world. You have the internet, and that means you have a level playing field in terms of creating a global market right away. And despite that, I still see a lot of Indian founders wanting to go to other places and wanting to go to other locations because that's sort of like the thing to do, or it feels like where the action is. But in reality, like there's just an amazing advantage here of like not doing that, staying in India, building from here, growing locally, and building a global product. And I'm curious if you agree with that, or not, or also any kind of like thoughts around when Indian founders are getting started. Like, what do you think about like the VC landscape in this environment relative to other places? What advice do you have for folks developing their early startups, either just starting or once they have a team and are in the seed stage, about whether or not they should stay here, go elsewhere, pursue investors locally, elsewhere in the world, and so on.
Yeah, so this is nuanced and it's not one size fits all, but let me say a few things about it. Um, First is that the big point that I was making in that post is that um, India has just improved a lot in the last 10 or 20 years, such that at a minimum, it's a launching pad. That is to say, it's a place where you have good enough internet connectivity, good enough electricity, good enough, um, let's say, just just reliability to the outside world, right, and connectivity to the outside world, that you can learn and you can boot up and you can get your MVP going, and that was just not the case like 20 years ago or even 10 years ago before there was widespread mobile internet and so on and so forth. So that's the first is at a minimum you can kind of get started. And then what do you do next? Well, um, there you could think of it as there being a location stack, right? Where are you physically? Where's your company, right? Where are your employees? Where are your contractors? Where are your customers? Where are your servers? Okay. It's absolutely simplest if they're all in the same place. However, depending on what you decide to do, a lot of people will, for example, use Stripe Atlas or something like that, and they will live in India, but they will incorporate outside India, and they will sort of have like non-Indian business structure because they want US courts or US banking or what have you. And I think there's a lot of things that I understand why people do that, and I think there's a a rationale to that. Uh, I also think that things are getting worse in the U.S. in terms of the banking, in terms of the courts. It's a whole separate, kind of thing. Um, so then, like something like Singapore is another option. Dubai is another option. Um, I think if you were choosing today, I would, the pro of the U.S. is that it's still a familiar jurisdiction, and who knows how much problems it's going to have in the future. The con of the U.S. is it might have problems in the future, and then it's harder to switch from there. That's why I say it's in flux, right? So I'm not going to make a recommendation on it. I would just say that I personally see a lot of Indians who are choosing like Singapore or Dubai or something like that if they're going outside of India. And of course, there's all these countries around the world that the diaspora goes to, right? Um, and then within India, they're improving this place called Gift City. Um, it's improving. It's not yet at the level of Dubai or Singapore in my view in terms of international business, and I said that in the post. Um, but it's improving, and so maybe it's going to get there. Okay, and what I mean by that is just sending wires in, sending wires out, right? Like not having to go through a lot of hassle when you do that, and it's an open capital account and 50 different things like that with the paperwork and what have you. So, my answer there is your location stack is kind of like your software stack for your company, right? I can't give a one size fits all that you should use Python on the back end and JavaScript on the front end and Postgres on, as your database and so on. That works for a lot of projects, right? What I see a lot of people doing is either being in India and setting up like a US company, right? Uh, B, with Stripe Atlas or something. B, being in India full stack, right? C, um, moving to Singapore or Dubai or something like that and then operating from there, right? And D, there's other configurations. And it really kind of depends on what kind of business you're doing. For crypto, like it may be easier to move to Dubai. It's just like overall maybe more friendly, right? Or some other jurisdiction. For other areas where the state is fully behind you, because crypto, RBI is somewhat negative on it. Other people are positive on it, and it's a function of kind of where things will go in terms of prices and so on. The Indian state is not super positive on crypto yet, but if you notice, the Chinese state turned around on crypto, which is actually very interesting, and they actually had people in Hong Kong calling banks and telling them you need to add crypto because once you push crypto out, you lose so much money that you want it back, right? Hong Kong wanted crypto back. They needed things to do, right? So that's very unusual. Normally, when something gets like banned or regulated, it just stays down. It doesn't like come back up. Certainly doesn't come back up with like people making calls to make it come back up. So I think crypto will also come back up in India as prices come back up. So that's a nuanced answer where, as I said, it's in flux. I mean, eventually, what you want, by the way, um, before did I tell you this? Before blockchains, international business didn't exist. You know what I mean by that? It's
Um,
like, for example, let's say somebody was in Brazil and they want to acquire a company in Bangladesh.
mhm.
Okay, how many how many lawyers speak Portuguese and Urdu?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
and know the complexities
yeah.
of or Portuguese and Bengali, and they know the complexities of multiple jurisdictions and who know what the tax and compliance, whatever obligations are for something like that, right? So instead, what they often do is for some situation like that, you set up a US company because there's enough US Brazil business and precedent and enough US Bangladesh business and precedent to essentially have the US be the mutually agreed upon forum for dispute resolution between these two companies. And then now you've reduced the end to end problem to an end to one problem. You turn it into
Mhm,
hub and spoke.
mhm.
Okay. The other country where you could do this potentially would be China, because China ships so many goods to everywhere in the world. It ships to Brazil, it ships to Bangladesh, that almost certainly there's some Chinese, you know, there's probably some Chinese court that has some precedent on the business back and forth between these two places, right? Hundreds of Chinese ship containers are coming every week in and out of these places. Okay. So they have to do enough business for there. So that means that you actually have legal centralization to a much greater extent than people think, where the U.S. and China or Hong Kong in particular get a lot of this business as sort of hubs, right? And obviously Cayman and a few other places do as well. But now we have something totally new, which is that Brazilian and Bangladeshi, in theory, as individuals at least, can both enter into a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain or another blockchain, and they can diligence it in the universal language of code, and they don't need to speak Portuguese or Bengali or what have you, right? They basically all speak either English and Solidity or whatever, and that's totally new. That
Yep.
the
Yep.
full scope of that right now, it's individual to individual. We haven't yet. I mean, obviously, what happens is you go from payments on chain to your full financials on chain for an organization to your full accounting on chain. And when your accounting is on chain, you can have like a public company, you can have cryptographically verifiable accounting, so you can have investment on chain, okay, and you have a stock market on chain.
Yep.
And you can eventually put all of Delaware and all of Wall Street on chain, all of the things that it does. And that's actually where capitalism lives as the US and China become ever more protectionist and socialist and what have you.
Yeah,
Right.
I completely
And
agree
that's,
with this
go ahead.
with this view where one of the great improvements that blockchains give us is this um, pseudo jurisdiction structure, like the hooks that you need to build a business jurisdiction or a government jurisdiction. And this is one of the areas where if we could take the best of corporate law globally and generate a new jurisdiction on the internet, adjudicated by either smart contracts and where you can, or people, or even AI models where you can, but it can be just a different place of business that is internet native. I think could be a super valuable contribution, and I think we're basically ready. We have a lot of the components for building something like that. And I think it could start with businesses around the world, between all of the countries in the world that don't want to go to the big mega economies anymore because the tax of doing that is just too high. And so you can now start there and kind of grow from there. It's been awesome to see this kind of perspective taken up by the network states community. I think that's like super cool and super valuable. What do you think are like the next experiments needed in the next year or two to build out that kind of path? Um,
Great question. So, everybody here, if you want to hear about that, go and subscribe at balajies.com, the Substack, and go to the networkstate.com. You can read the book and what have you. I'll make a few comments on that, Juan. First is one way of thinking about it. So you mentioned about like a new jurisdiction or what have you. Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, these are like cloud countries, but half of them. Okay. It's half of what a country is. Because what is a country? A country is a group of people in a physical space that agrees on laws, right? And we take for granted that physical grouping, it's the map of the world and it's divided into these things, right? But if you don't start with the lands and you instead start with the minds in a social network, and your fundamental thing that you're thinking about is individual nodes in the social network and how they're clustered, right? There's a large cluster of several hundred million people that's called Bitcoin. There's another cluster of about 100 million people or thereabouts, maybe more, called Ethereum, right? And these are the scale of UN member states. In fact, they're bigger than the vast majority of UN member states because um, more than 50% of UN member states have less than 10 million people.
yep.
Okay. So now the thing about it is, on the one hand, one way to think about these cloud countries have different property rights, different contract law, different dispute resolution than your offline governments, because that's what blockchains are. They are digital governments. And going in, storing some money in Bitcoin is like driving over the border to Switzerland and storing your money in a better system of law and property rights than your defunct, old regime, right? Now that Switzerland itself has been corrupted, where, for example, it wasn't just the sanctions, it was also the Credit Suisse bailout where they wrecked all bondholders, and if they're going to wreck a guy who's got decades of investment in Switzerland, has bought their bonds of their biggest companies and so on and so forth. they're going to wreck a guy who's put billions of dollars in. They're definitely going to wreck you who has a $100,000 deposit there, right? So Switzerland is being ruined, unfortunately, as a financial center, as for generations of sort of disinterested, Swiss gnomes that prize their neutrality and thought long term. They've just gotten wrecked by the new generation, right? So on chain is then the new Switzerland because it is provably very difficult to corrupt, right? And that's new. We basically are scarce on trust and we're abundant on computation. So we use computation, right? Okay. So the only issue though is this is only half of what a government is. It's the digital half. It's the property rights, the contracts, it's the dispute resolution, it's the identity, right? It is the registry, for example, birth and death registry is right, corporate incorporation. It's the accounting. It is eventually it'll be the reputation services. Now that we have something like Farcaster, you can put an SEC on top of that because you can have individuals that can rate and review projects, and all that kind of stuff can be done. Decentralized social is actually a crucial primitive for a bunch of these things because you have individuals and you have the projects they're associated with and the transactions they've made, and you can get a profile which is how reliable an actor is this person in crypto, and it's no longer just based on some SEC guy's judgment, but it's based on an algorithm that's actually parsing all of this stuff and then putting it on site, right? So many of the digital functions of a state can be done with blockchains now, or they're already there or getting there, right? The physical part is the part that remains. And that's what the network state is about, right? Once you've got a group of people online with sufficient capital and ideological alignment, it's like, the opening scene in Pride and Prejudice. A community in possession of all this capital and ideological alignment must be in want of some territory, the
Yep.
opening
Yep.
kind of line for Pride, right?
Yep.
And a historical analogy of this in the 1600s and early 1700s, the people who lived in North America didn't think of themselves as Americans. They thought of themselves as British. And it's as if they were like living in Hawaii, okay, and they were just a few thousand miles away from London, which was their capital. And they were just like, remote British, right? British that were working in a remote part of the empire or whatever. Over time, what happened was because they were a people and they had a land, but they didn't have their own government because the government was from London, right? Over time, enough social network connections built among the people who lived in North America that they started thinking of themselves as their own people, the Americans. And then eventually there was a break from Britain and they were people in a land and now they had a government, right? We're the opposite. We, the crypto people, are a people that have a government, are blockchains. We don't yet have land.
Yep.
That's really interesting,
Yep.
right? That's why I say the internet is to America what America was to the UK. It is the next frontier.
Yep.
Hundreds of millions of people have opted into this new frontier. They form social and financial connections with each other. They have agreed essentially mutually the consent of the governed. They have all consented to be governed by these laws, right, that bind them. That's the actual legitimation of a system, is that did you opt into it? Can you opt out of it, right? The exit legitimation. And what they just don't have yet is the land. And that's what the network state is about.
Yep. Awesome. That's a very interesting thread for a lot of the people here to pursue and develop and further. We're out of time at the moment. Any last?
Sure.
Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your time with us. It's been really great to get to chat through all of these topics. Any last words of advice or wisdom to builders here?
Go read the first chapter of the networkstate.com and subscribe on Substack. There's going to be a lot more coming.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Balaji. Always great to think through all of this together. And thank you for pushing so many important ideas in the world. Many of us here have an enormous amount of respect and admiration for you pushing forward in a lot of these things and being a great public thinker in an era where we desperately need them. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Juan. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.